Okay, so today we're going to go over citing, which is a technique that you can use to kind of measure, figure out distance between objects in your still life, find the angles of objects in your still life, and it's just a more precise way of working. So with all of the drawing techniques that we go over in this class, it's a good idea to we're going to work on them kind of one at a time. But in reality, you're going to use multiple techniques when you do a drawing, right? So especially with citing drawings, it's a good idea to kind of gesture maybe a little bit about what your objects are. So you'll see a picture of this still life up on canvas, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to make a few marks on my page. Hopefully. So I'm going to make one about here and one about here, right? So this is the kind of picture plane that I have to work with. So I'm just going to focus on the top part of that still life where that little like geometric dome is sitting and that candlestick, right? So if this is the top of my page, I'm going to make like a little bit of a mark. I want that dome to come down about this size. So when you guys are kind of looking and translating objects that are much bigger than what you're drawing them as, it's important to kind of set your page up with these guidelines first, so it gives you an idea about where everything is, right? And how big you want things to look like. I'm also going to kind of gesture at that part of the the stand. So that dome thing is sitting on top of, it's a gesso bucket that's covered with a piece of cloth. But just to kind of get an idea, I'm standing up a little bit more so I see more of that open. So I'm just kind of gesturing at that ellipse. And then I'm also going to kind of gesture at the candlestick. So with this citing, I'm just going to kind of pop in a line over here. And it has these 4 extra candlesticks, right? So kind of have a little bit of a guidelines. Now these are all marks that I'm going to eventually erase. I'm using an HB pencil, which is fine. I like to cite with pencils because it's kind of a 2-for-1 tool. But you can also cite with charcoal, vine charcoal, anything like that. You don't want to go too high up in the B pencils or something that's too dark or puts like a very defined mark on the page because it's going to be harder to adjust. With citing, most times you're going to want to go back, fix things, readjust your angles. So keep it light and keep it kind of loose in the beginning, right? So what I'm going to do, one important thing with citing. So instead of holding your pencil like this is like how I would hold to draw or sketch. With citing, I like to call them a one-way pencil. And so what that means is that I kind of flip the way I hold my pencil. And so I'm kind of holding it more like this with my thumb up. This is kind of in place of a citing stick. So you have your citing stick that can also translate to your pencil. And so what happens is I'll capture the angle that I see with an arm fully extended out. I know it's hard to see. You don't see all of my arm. But so let's say, for instance, I'm capturing the side of one of those domes. And I can put my pencil to the angle that I want, hold it out firm, and then pull back, right? And so this is going to not only capture the angle that I see, but it's going to give me a guideline to kind of work from, right? So one important one I'm going to get, if that's the top of my geometric dome shape, I'm going to get that angle that goes down to the candlestick, right? And so notice I'm always pulling this way. It's really uncomfortable at first, so if you're just starting out with citing, it's going to be a kind of weird experience. But the more that you do it, the easier it does get, right? So I'm going to kind of go along and cite some of these angles here. I know you see my hand disappear quite a bit, but just to kind of, for the sake of demo. So I'm making some of these lines. You guys see how I'm going through? So if this is one of the points of where that, it was a little plant holder I got at like a craft store. This is where those glass pieces kind of converge at the base, right? And so you see how I went past that. With this technique, especially the one-way pencil where you're kind of pulling down, you don't want to just kind of pull and stop, right? You want to kind of pull that line all the way through, because this gives me, if this is the angle that glass shape is on, then if I need to drop it down, I can. I still have that guideline in place, right? So there's a couple angles too. I'm going to adjust this because I think it's a little steeper. And it gets to the point, maybe I have too many lines here. I can kind of erase the ones I don't think exist. I think my point's maybe down here a little bit more. I'm a little happier with this kind of line. Kind of work that in, right? So, you know, you can kind of go around and keep doing this all day. I will tell you that this is a very tedious technique. There's no doubt about it that citing is probably one of the most tedious things I ask students to do. There's not really a way around that. It's just tedious. But, you know, like I said in the beginning of this video, I'm not always going to ask you to do something by itself, right? 9 times out of 10, you're going to be working with a technique in like multiples, right? So maybe you're gesturing first and then you're citing. I'm going to kind of work in a few of these lines here that I've put in just so you guys can see a little bit easier. So this is starting to form the basis of my object, right? So I have these kind of 2 pentagon shapes here at the base. I see a little bit of this glass side here and then the angle back at the top, right? So I'm just going to kind of work some of this in. So like I said, citing is great to check angles, but maybe you don't need to cite everything that you see. And so as the artist, you kind of have to decide, you know, you're going to learn these techniques, but you also have to decide when they're appropriate. So when they're appropriate to use everything in tangent like this, like all at once, or when it's appropriate to kind of, you know, maybe gesture or sketch at something else, right? So the best thing about citing drawings is that they're really a great way to check accuracy and proportions, but keep it loose and still keep it flexible, right? So, you know, I'm believing most of these angles so far, and we'll go from there, right? So now when it comes to curved objects, like I have this curved base, and this is a glass object, so that's why you kind of see multiple lines running through. That back edge of that stand kind of sits about here, and then the front sits just a little bit in front. So you see that ellipse I was working with? I can kind of use some of the other parts of my object, like the corners of these, to kind of see how wide the ellipse should be, right? So on the right-hand side, it's kind of like right here. And on the left-hand side, it is a little bit more out from this, so it's not like perfectly centered. So I have 4 marks. This is also one of those things to go along with citing, which can fall under measuring. I'm kind of looking at some of the other anchor objects that I'm like, okay, I'm comfortable. I think this object I've got scale-wise as far as my drawing. This is going to help me find the base of my ellipse. And now I can kind of sit this into space, how I see, right? And so you guys can see I still made many multiple ellipses. That's okay, right? You're fine to kind of go beyond this and kind of work some of those harder shapes in. So I'm just going to kind of gesture at some of the folds in the fabric because this kind of tapers down. Then I'm going to get to my candlestick. So one other thing that's important about citing is that you can use it as a tool to help find angles between objects. So instead of just finding the angles of the actual object, because not everything is geometric, I can use it to find the angles between 2 objects, right? So I'm looking at the top of my candlestick and the top of this geometric dome, putting my citing stick between, lining up, and this is about the angle that I see. So I can pull back, right? This kind of line, I'll darken it up so you guys can see. And this is about the top of that candlestick, right? So I know that this is higher. So this is more accurate to what I see. And so you can also use the same thing with that. I'm just going to do that ellipse with the candlestick, kind of gesture it. It's got a lot of dips and turns, but I'm going to simplify this right quick just so you guys get the idea. So what about the 4 next to it? So I can also go from the top of this down to the other one. So I can line up my pencil, kind of pull down. I'm doing the front ones first. I have one that kind of sits in this space in front of this. I have one that kind of sits in the back. So there are some angles that you can't capture using this kind of Oneway pencil citing technique. One of the biggest ones is any angle that recedes away from you, right? So like I'm holding my pencil like this when it's outstretched. If I'm holding my pencil like this at any time and trying to cite that angle, when I go to pull back, I'm going to be pulling it back away from my page. So how you navigate those angles that recede into space, look at what lines up. So like this one, that one recedes away from me. But I can measure the distance between this one, this front one, and my next one. So I'm going to anchor that in. So this is the angle that kind of touches the outside. So from outside to outside. They're about the same space, right? So they're about the same size. I'm just going to do like a little miniature ellipse. So that's where that other kind of candlestick top sits, right? You guys can see that I'm using like a combination of gesture, using sighting angles to check my work. Just going to kind of gesture at the candlestick top there. And so with this one, I can sight this a couple different ways. I can see the end point of this guy. And I know that he comes behind this glass, but over a little bit, right? So maybe this angle, I need to check that again. I think it comes down more like this behind it. And so you can also sight the angle between these two. So this actually comes in a little bit more. So maybe this is more like the edge of my other one, right? So you see how that this space, even though it's receding away from me, and so maybe this ellipse is a little bit smaller, you can see that it kind of sits back into space, right? And we have that nice kind of tabletop in the way, right, that kind of covers up. So I'm starting to get that layered effect. Now, I already see some problems that I'd like to fix in my drawing, and that's going to happen. So maybe I think this needs to pull up some more. Kind of erase some of this. And this is where maybe even like a chamois or, using vine charcoal to begin with, because you can sight with a long stick of vine charcoal. There's nothing that says you can't. So maybe this pulls up more, and I think this angle comes up more. So the best thing about this technique is that you can constantly kind of check your work, right? I can kind of reevaluate some of my lines, and this to me sits more to what I see than, having it down, right? So the best part about sighting is that, like, not the tediousness. It is a really kind of long, thoughtful process, but this angle, these are a lot easier to change than if I'm doing a contour drawing, right? So sighting is more about getting that precision. This is kind of angled down a little bit. So maybe my next one's like right about here going off those angles. So it's, it's about precision, but it's also a thought process on a page. So like very much like gesture is, getting that more like energy or that essence of the object. This is similar, but now you're going back in and you're looking for more specific things. You're checking your angles and you're just trying to become more accurate in the perspective that you see and try to nail that space down, right? So I'm going to finish off this last little candlestick guy here. I can sight the tops. So that's what I've been doing as I've been talking, kind of sighting those angles because they're not just flush or parallel to my page. I know that this cuts in a little bit perspective-wise because this is further behind. And again, I know this does not look quite like this candlesticks in that picture, but I'm gesturing for the sake of demo. But you have the gist of, right? And so now I have like the little tendril things that would move to this space. So I have the essence and a start of a sighting drawing, knowing that I can go back, I can change these angles, I can wipe them out, I can strengthen them. But when you're really firm on an object, you can take a darker pencil and really crisp up that edge. So like this one, I'm like, this is definite. Like I feel very confident about that base of that planter. This one I'm going to just peer up a little bit, but like this, I'm like, this is firm. Same thing with this guy. Like this front edge here, I'm like, I know that this is where I think this should be. And every time you adjust your seat, the height of yourself, you're going to slightly change your angle of how you see things. So it's really important to try to keep consistent and try to move around as little as possible when you're doing a very technique-based drawing like this. So sighting in a nutshell, hopefully it was a little helpful.